Thrilled with the turnout today. This is a terrific response to our events. Let me put the microphone on. There we go. We're very glad to have all of you here today for our Friends of the Georgetown Library Tuesdays with lecture. For those who are not familiar, I introduced myself a moment ago. I'm Bob Willey. I've had the privilege the last 9 years, I think, to be president of the Friends of the Library. There was a term limit when I came on. Somehow it disappeared. It often happens in volunteer organizations, but it's been a privilege to be able to be in this position with the Friends of supporting what is a fantastic library, a great staff that's really wonderfully serving this community, and it is a privilege to be a part of it. Our program is such that we work particularly working with children's reading programs and supporting them in financial assistance, as well as our adult programs, and in doing that, serving this wonderful community of Georgetown. This is one of our programs, Tuesdays With, which we've been doing now. This is our 8th season. The title is based on a book, 1997 bestseller, Tuesdays with Maury, which is a wonderful book of a relationship between a college student and a college professor that continued on way beyond the 4 years of college. And that's what our program is all about, continuing education for all of us and opportunities to be able to learn. It doesn't stop at 21 or 18 or 25 or wherever your formal education concluded, but it continues all through our lives. And that is really a wonderful experience. As we provide programs on the 3rd Tuesday of each month, from September through May, so we have a few more months. We'll talk about that at the end of the program. But as we have these programs, we bring in the best of speakers to talk about things about Georgetown and Georgetown County. This is an incredible place for history, geography, nature, you go on, and it's just a wonderful place to be able to learn and study and to live. So today we are privileged to have for our Tuesday with Kendy Altizer. Some of you, I gather from conversations I've seen, have met Kendy previously, but to give a little bit of background, she is an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of North Georgia. Her areas of expertise are historical archaeology, plantation systems, rice culture, enslaved lifeways. Now here's the one she's going to have to explain to us, remote sensing, which is kind of a scary thought. I mean, you can catch up with us when we're far away. Geographic information systems. She has her Master of Science in Historic Preservation from Clemson University and the College of Charleston, a PhD in Anthropology from the University of Tennessee with a concentration in Historic Archaeology. More than a decade of experience she's had conducting archaeological survey and testing on the Santee Delta. This is why I know many of you are here today to hear much about that, which has been her primary research focus. Her presentation today is the most inhospitable of environments, enslaved life in the rice fields of the Santee Delta. Please join me in welcoming Kendy Altizer.
Gosh, I don't know if I can follow that up or not. Thanks, Bob. So thank you. Wow, there's a lot of people here. It's like teaching a double section of Intro to Anthropology. It's nice to see you. I'm Kendy Altizer. Thank you for that great introduction, Bob. I appreciate it. Before we get started, I thought I'd introduce myself formally. As Bob said, I have a Master of Science degree in Historic Preservation from Clemson University and the College of Charleston. And then I went on to do my PhD at the University of Tennessee, studying under Barbara Heath, because I began my historic preservation journey here in the Santee Delta, working at Peachtree Plantation, and I just kept having more questions than answers, so I thought I needed to get going. Just keep going. Before I actually went back for a master's degree, it took about 12 gap years off. It's okay, you can do that. It's fine to do that. before I did that, I was working in cultural resource management, which is that sweet little picture up here. This is me doing some remote survey out in the northeast corner of Utah using a helicopter. It was like the best thing ever, you guys. It was awesome. So when I decided to go back to school, I kind of wanted to do something different. I wasn't really tired of archaeology, but I'd been working in the West for a long time. And I thought, I just want to shake things up a little bit. So that's why I chose historic preservation. Got to do some really cool things like uncover this sweet little painting in the ceiling of Ochre Court, which is in Newport, Rhode Island on Salve Regina University campus. So that was really neat. Also got to work with Trish Smith out at Drayton Hall. We took down the portico boards and got covered in 17th and 18th century dust. Also one of my formative experiences. Love that. When I went back for historic preservation, I was really focused on the built environment, and I was really excited about that. And as I was looking at Peachtree, contemplating life, like down here, I thought, I wonder if anybody's ever done any archaeology on here, and I'll tell you all about Peachtree in just a second. And my advisor said, no, nobody's done any archaeology. You should ask the property owner if that's okay, if you wanted to do something like that. We could probably marry that in with some above ground architecture. And so I asked, and he said, no, it's cool, go for it. And so I did. And that is how I got a master's degree and also included some archaeology. And it just kind of sucks me back. It doesn't matter what I do, I always end up doing archaeology. So that was exciting. I had more questions than answers to that little foray. And so I just kept going. I was already in my 40s. I was already poor. And I thought, now's the perfect time to do this. So I did. And I wound up with a PhD, which is insane, but here I am right now. And I love it. This is like my third career. I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. And as you can see, there are a few more images of me. This is my significant other doing rice coring sampling. Did that. We can talk about that later. That's for another topic. And then me of late, digging between the rivers in the Santee Delta. So that's a little bit about me and about who I am. What I want to do is kind of tell you what I've been up to the last dozen years or so that I've been out here digging and searching for information about people that we just don't know too much about. So I thought I would do that centered on the places that I've worked deeper time past, like Peachtree, more recently at Rochelle on the north side of the Santee. And then our latest work at Atchison's Creek, and then I'm going to end up telling you why you should care, why all this stuff matters, and what we're going to do about it going forward. So I get a little wordy. I might pace. If you can't hear me, I'll try to take this with me, this microphone. If you can't hear me, just say, hey, Kendy, hey, cool. All right, here we go. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so if you didn't know where we are, this is where we are. This is the Santee River system. This sweet little map over here off to the side, right here. This is the 1873 U.S. Coast Survey. This is a systems of maps. It goes all up and down the eastern seaboard. We are very fortunate that we actually have this map. We don't know too much about the Santee River Delta or the infrastructure that was here. We know broadly about the plantations that are here. And there have been several works that I'm sure you're all familiar with that have done a great job at telling us about plantation owners, chains of title, things like that. But the truth is, in terms of landscape, which is what I'm really interested in, we just don't know that much. There's not too much that survives in terms of historical plats and maps. So I like this one a whole lot because it's telling us where some things are located. So when you're talking about 55,000 acres or so worth of land, that's a lot of stuff to survey, y'all. There's a lot going on there. So this gives us an idea of places that we might want to take a more targeted look at. If you're curious about those little red dots, these are the places that we're going today. This is Peachtree down on the South Santee. It's technically in Charleston County, but we're right there on the border, so we're just going to zhuzh that a little bit, right? This is Rochelle Plantation up on the north side of the Santee, and then we're going to go hang out over here at Atchison's Creek for a few minutes at the end of this talk. So, Santee River hydrology is a little bit different than some of our other river systems. This is the only big delta that we have on the entire eastern seaboard. It's a brown water river, which just means there's a lot of tannins that are in it that kind of make it look like that black color. And it originates in the Blue Ridge Mountains, which means it's got a while to get down here, which is one of the reasons why the mouth of the delta is so broad. It's also a submerged river valley. There's a lot going down underneath that black water that you can't even see. We do have some effects of the Santee River, or the Santee Hydroelectric Project, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It was done in the 1940s and 50s. They did a water diversion project, made Lake Moultrie, and then created a hydroelectric power plant, which was really important for the region, but it's done some bad things to the delta. So you can see this right here is a plume of silt. And it just means that we've got some damming action that's happening. All that silt is coming all the way down. It's one of the reasons why we can't grow rice here anymore. This is the heart of rice agriculture in the colonial era, all the way up through the antebellum period. And you can see from that map, all of those lines here, mostly everything that you see here is all rice field. And a lot of that infrastructure is still left today. It was very lucrative. It made lots of people lots of money. There was also a very large enslaved workforce that was here that we don't know too much about. So that's kind of the purpose of doing most of the archaeology that I do. After the Santee hydroelectric project gets put in place, it changed the salinity of the river system. It's important to note too, by the 1890s or so, we were kind of already out of rice culture. Labor prospects had changed, actually had to pay people for their labor, and that impacts the bottom line. There's a tiny bit of an environmental fluctuation too. So that's changing the way that the weather is running, lots of seasonal freshets that are wiping out crops. Planters are still trying to recover from the Civil War, and a series of bad years just effectively cuts that, right? Not really happening anyway. Then you add the effects of the hydroelectric project, which really does change the salinity of the river. So what you're looking at here, this is the original historical salt line. That's about the edge of where you couldn't grow rice anymore because there's not enough fresh water in here. So these areas down here are never really developed, but you can see that's the remnants of tidal rice even right there. This is the historical line, and then after that hydroelectric project, the salt line is now way up here. So most of this delta, we're not doing rice, even if we wanted to. You could experiment with it, but it's probably not going to go real well. So a little bit about our river system. We were settled by Europeans in the 1680s or so. These are French Huguenots, a few other folks too. Most of our French Huguenots are coming from Charlestown settlement and just seeking other opportunities, trying to get out of the way and kind of create their own little path. By tidal rice culture is in effect by the 1750s. We do have some evidence of inland rice. People are practicing these two different kinds of rice culture. But really tidal rice is what makes this river system so productive over time. We do have inland rice at Peachtree. I'll show you some evidence for that. And then also at Smith Hill, which is on the north side of the Santee, and I'll point that out at the end of this presentation. So think of the Santee River in terms of large commercial rice enterprise. There are other river systems that are practicing this. Georgetown County with the PD and the Waccamaw, also commercial rice enterprise. There are other river systems further south that are really more just dabbling in it. It's not as productive and lucrative as it is up here because of the mouth of this delta. We just have all this land. It is the perfect nexus for it. There are similar river systems and deltas in West Africa. So we think a lot of that knowledge is coming over with enslaved workforce, and that's how we understand tidal rice culture today. So rice does persist tiny through the early part of the 20th century, but it's really not that lucrative enterprise that it was during the antebellum period. We're also consistently producing naval stores through the entire period, even up to today. After rice culture is no longer an active enterprise, waterfowl hunting kind of takes over, and we get a series of gun clubs that come into place on the Santee River. So what's happening is we're getting wealthy northern interests that are coming from up north. They're looking for timber, so they come here for the timber, but they stay for the ducks. And they do even now, right? Even today. So this is some LiDAR imagery that I have from Peachtree. I'm kind of a technology geek, so you'll see little bits and pieces. I'll talk about remote sensing in a little while. So fun. This is one of the ways that we understand what's going on around the landscape. Basically, you're looking at a bare earth view without the vegetation to kind of block it. So we can see things that people have manipulated over time as opposed to the more natural environment. It's really helpful if you've got a bunch of salt marsh or a bunch of tree cover and you're looking for evidence that people have manipulated the land. I like this in particular. This is a snapshot of Peachtree in the pea field, and we're going to revisit that in a minute with some other pictures. But it's basically these two little reservoirs right here, and they are connected by a canal system. And that is coming all the way down here and going out to Montgomery Creek. So they're actively feeding water through there, and that water is being used for the pea field, which is right here, and then also another slave settlement that's down here. So it's doing double time. Probably it was being used until it just fell into disrepair. This does not go away when tidal rice culture takes over. If it was still usable, they would have been using it. And it was probably primarily when we switched to tidal rice culture in the 1750s. Peachtree gets settled in the 1730s or so. This was probably the first way to actually do some agriculture and have a permanent water source. So with inland rice, we don't use the tide for fresh water flow. We're basically using rainfall, whatever we can gather in a system, and then using a series of reservoirs to get it out over the canal system over time. With tidal rice, we are relying on the tidal flow. We get a regular interval, which I'm sure all of our fishermen are really aware of. Y'all, I learned how to boat last couple of years. I understand the tides now. Haven't gotten stuck out there on low tide. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So this is really, really important, right? Understanding the tides, when it's high tide, when it's low tide. Once you time that, it comes at regular intervals. When you understand how to harness that flow, then you have a constant, steady water source, and you can control it with a series of canals, dikes, and sluice gates, which is exactly what's happening here in this very, very remote area with all of this infrastructure. When you think about how this place was built, this is insane. And it was all built with human labor that was enslaved. This is forced labor. Folks are forced to do this. One of the bigger overarching questions that we have for the Delta is who is living and working out here on a daily basis, particularly between the river systems. These are remote areas, but we do find evidence of enslaved settlements. People are living out here. And we want to know, what are they eating? Do they have to truck everything in? Like, are we boating all this stuff in? How are they living? It's wet and gross out here. There's lots of mosquitoes. How do they survive that most inhospitable of environments, right? I give to you the mosquito. It's a lot. When you think about like the ins and outs of everyday life and what a struggle that must have been, not having the names and the voices of the people that were doing this labor is heartbreaking. So that's one of the questions that we seek to answer is, who's living here? What does everyday life look like? Weird questions, y'all, like, where do we go to the bathroom, right? We don't know. Where does the fresh water come from? Where is it being trucked in? Is there a potable water source? Are we digging a well? We don't know. These are answers to questions we don't have. And probably some we'll never get to, right? But there are a few that we can answer, and I firmly believe that we can. And we can do it with archaeology and some historical records. One of the things that we as historical archaeologists do is pull on everything that we can. So we have the benefit of historical documents. They don't always tell us about all the people, right, that are living and working on these lands. Sometimes we can read between the lines. And then sometimes we can go in the field and maybe come up with some answers that are contrary to what the written record is telling us. And I think that's a very interesting way to kind of look at it, right? Then we're also supplementing, I use geographic information systems, so all those historical maps that you're seeing I've overlaid on modern topography and aerial maps so that I can understand the landscape a little bit better. So any historical plat that I can find gets overlaid, so we have a better idea of what the landscape looks like. So that's how I see my archaeology, and that's what guides me to do some of the things that I do. Not everything. I also have the benefit of a vast array of colleagues. I cannot do this by myself. It takes a small army of researchers all kind of pinging back and forth with each other to understand this landscape. It's a complicated one, and it changes over time. So let's take you to Peachtree. This is on the south side of the Santee River, just off of Highway 17, just a little bit north. I am particularly interested in lynches. I will blame that on Carter Hudgens, the senior, because he's the one that first took us out here in 2013 as part of my Master's Science program in Historic Preservation. And that's how I found Colonel Thomas Lynch's property. We think we're settled somewhere around 1733 or so. The main house isn't built until around 1760 or so, and it's built by enslaved people for Thomas Lynch Sr., who is Granddaddy Lynch's son. We know there are 39 people living on this landscape before this house is ever built, and they had all the stuff to build things like, not necessarily this house because it doesn't come along for another 30 years, but things like rice fields and housing, cooperage to build all of the barrels that we're going to need to store rice in, things like that. So there was enough infrastructure here to have people living and working here full time, maybe not necessarily a main planter. I have no evidence for a main house before this little gem is built, but it is quite possible there was something here before. I don't have that information. There's very little in the documents in terms of Peachtree Plantation itself and kind of the mechanics of day-to-day running of it. We don't have planters' journals or anything like that. So it's important. It's also eligible under the National Register of Historic Places under all four criteria, A, B, C, D, as a home to the signer of the Declaration of Independence. Now, importantly, mostly everybody is only living here part-time except for the enslaved workforce. So by about 1835, the Lynch family have moved on. We lose Thomas Lynch Jr., the signer, in 1779. He's lost at sea. If you want to know about lynches, I'm all about that. That's for another lecture, though. It's literally, I can talk to you 8 hours about this, and I have. So by about 1835, it's rented out to the Dorr family, and they have a lot of land out in the Delta during the latter part of the 1700s, well up through the 20th century. They're a big planter family, and they rent some of those lands and then later buy some of them too. And you'll see evidence of doors throughout this presentation. They're just kind of everywhere. The house burns in 1840. They don't rebuild it. The Lynches, by this time, the heirs to this property have moved to Tennessee, and they're no longer interested. But they do keep it because it was home to Thomas Lynch Jr., and that's very important to the family. So it burns in 1840, never rebuilt. It just kind of falls into ruin. When I found it, I didn't find it, but when I first pawned it myself with my eyes, this is what it looked like. This is the very first picture I ever took of this house. The walls are 2 feet thick. Back in its heyday, it would have been almost 10,000 square feet worth of living space. A mile into the marsh, right on the South Santee River. It would have been really, really imposing to be floating down that river and see that little nugget, right? And it's a big, big house. So we've had timber products, tenant farming, cattle ranching. Right now, it's leased to a hunt club, has been since the 1980s. It also holds one of the first conservation easements on the Delta, which is really important. This place sets precedent for other plantation owners during the 20th century to actively place their plantations under conservation easement. And that's what helps us protect against big development. It's a really sensitive area. We like to keep it private, right? It's really important for waterfowl habitat for a number of species that are endangered, and also for the infrastructure of these systems and being able to understand archaeology without that population pressure of new development. We just don't get a lot of that here, and we like it like that. I like it. So these are the first inhabitants of Peachtree as we know them in 1739. We don't know much about them except for what you see on this slide. But they are there and they're doing things. They're working this landscape. They provided the first labor for this place. That big old house you see was built with their hands and with with descendants' hands. They're important. They're important to this place. And they're the reason why we have all of this infrastructure. It's amazing to me to think about all these people that are living on this landscape. And this is what we know. So this is my job, probably until I die, is to figure out who these people are and how they're living on that landscape. That's really important. We don't need to lose those voices if we can help it. So this is what we know of Peachtree. Oh, there's that 1873 U.S. Coast Survey map again. It doesn't tell us everything, and that's okay. We don't need it to tell us everything, right? It just gives us a good invitation or a good indication of where we need to look. We're gonna bump over here to the pea field. First, I'm gonna show you the main house in 1875. This is the oldest picture we have, and it's a good indicator of a bunch of architectural details. I'm showing it to you because people are curious, right? They're trying to figure out what to do with this house and this property. It's kind of a big deal. I did some excavation in the main house. This is part of my dissertation research. The rumor is that the fire started in the kitchen and this is how this house burned down, and we actually found it. I got lucky. I just had a rumor in some secondary literature, and it turns out that the fire actually did start in the kitchen. The reason it did is because this is a secondary build, this flue system. These guys should be over here and facing this way. So they put in a small stew stove, and it didn't draw properly, and probably it sucked up some ember, torched the roof, which is likely a cypress shake shingle, and that is how the fire happened and why the house burned down. So really interesting things that came out of here. This is what the inside of the ruin looks like today. We stabilized it in 2015 based on a preservation plan that I put together that the property owners were kind enough to do. So this is not permanent. This house is a ruin. It's not staying this way. It will eventually go back to the elements. This is a temporary measure of maybe 30 years or so that we can study it some more. I have a dream to actually clean out the entire inside and excavate. It's for another day. I got a lot of other stuff to do too, but maybe at some point we'll get back to this. Here's what she looks like now. Yeah, not too bad, right? The walls are 2 feet thick. That's the only reason she's here. So let's bump into the pea field. We've done some targeted excavation in here. In 2020, the forester had an inadvertent discovery when they were doing some timber work and bumped into the remnants of a foundation. And we kind of knew broadly that it was there. I was still recovering from my dissertation at the time and had not surveyed in that area before they started timbering. So when that happened, they were kind enough to call me and say, hey, we got some stuff and you should probably come look. So we spent a couple of years out here doing some targeted excavation, and I think what we have here is actually the Dorr family house. It's the first one that they built before they moved to Harrietta, further up toward the mouth of the Delta. The reason I think that it's got a run riverstone foundation, which is weird. We don't have riverstone on the Santee River. So it's probably ballast that's coming in on the ships. It's a little bit overbuilt. We have some nice sort of higher style artifacts that come out of there. This is a button, probably like a cufflink situation. a full intact pipe bowl, which I never see. I only get little bits and pieces. Y'all, if I even find an intact brick in this place, I get really excited. We just don't have a whole lot of it unless it's down around the main house. This place gets bluted for brick all the time. So let's bump over and hang out with some more lynches at the Marsh Plantation, which is now modern day Rochelle. We're on the north side of the river now. It was also established by Colonel Thomas Lynch. He gets about 4,500 acres or so by land grant. I think that's actually a fallacy in the literature because anything under 500 or 5,000 acres in the 1700s, you were taxed a little bit lighter. So most of our planters get 4,500 to 5,000 acre tracts. This one is probably closer to 5,200 or so. I think he did a little bit of a lie there. It's okay though. I mean, who was going to track him anyway, right? Yeah. So that's a chunk of land out here. He actually had about 7 plantations on the Santee Delta. I think he was on to something. That's for a book, not for this lecture. So now Rochelle, which is just this tract of land here, about 450 acres or so, I believe, is part of that broader Marsh Plantation scheme. So the reason I am interested in this area very particularly is Thomas Lynch Jr. does inherit this property, but it's really important to his younger sister, Miss Hetty, Esther Lynch. She's one of the only female planters that we know of on the Santee Delta, and she's really interesting, y'all. She's super quirky. Lots of stuff going on with her in the literature, but nobody ever really talks about her that much because Eliza Lucas paint me in indigo, right? That's a big deal. So we kind of lose her, and I was chasing Miss Hetty's house. I really wanted to understand where Miss Hetty's house was. So I was looking, we have the 1873 U.S. Coast Survey, which doesn't tell us a whole lot in this particular area, except for where we have a very large presence of enslaved people. There is a very large settlement here, which I also did some shovel testing on. I am going to show you this little area here though, because I want to talk to you a little bit about some remote sensing techniques that I use. So this was very much a commercial enterprise, very much. Everything was cultivated. After Lynch Jr.'s death, there is a stipulation in his will that this would be the plantation that would be sold off to pay the family's debts off. So they sell it off, and within about 10 years, Miss Hetty has reestablished this place, and she lives here probably full-time. She's one of the only people that actually lives here full-time, white people planters, until her death in 1823 or so. So she effectively puts the pieces back together after it gets sold off. And I was very curious about where her house was. So here's that 1873 U.S. Coast Survey, and the main house itself is actually right in here. So there's a number of structures here that I was curious about. This is all settlement, all enslaved settlement. People are living here continuously from the late 1700s all the way up through the 20th century. The property owner actually tells me there are remnants of these structures through the 1990s. I'm sad that I came along a little bit too late to see them before they were torn down because they were not safe, and they're right next to the river road. Then a few other places too where people are living and working. So after Miss Hetty's death, we do produce rice here until about 1890 or so. And then it gets sold to a hunt club. Arthur Manigo actually purchased this property as a family retreat. It's still in the family today. And it also has that conservation easement situation on it too, on the North Santee. So let me show you what I did. I found this guy. This is an 1897 addendum to plat, and addendum to title plat map. It basically is putting things back together after somebody dies and showing us where things are located to a certain degree. So here it is overlaid, and you can see these two things right here. Now, mostly when people draw things, when a surveyor is actively putting something on a map, they're going to be showing you where people are living. not necessarily all of the other infrastructure like barns and outbuildings and things like that. So when I saw this, I thought, I wonder if one of those is Miss Hetty's house. Where is that thing? Because the modern house sits right here. And then there are two little buildings right here that are just reconstructions. They were moved here at some point in the 1960s or so. So I thought, this could be a good candidate if we have a main house right here. Maybe it's somewhere in the property owner's front yard. There was also this little guy here too that I was curious about. We shovel tested over there and did find that that is actually a barn. It's probably a rice processing facility. It's got a brick foundation to it. It's fully run, which is interesting. But if you have a labor force and they're already making brick, then that could be a lucrative thing, right? So what are we doing down here? Perhaps I'll do some ground penetrating radar and figure that out in my property owner's front yard. So I don't know if this will work or not. I took a sweet video. This is how you collect data using a ground penetrating radar in 30 seconds or less. Literally, it took me 45 minutes. Yeehaw! So basically, what we're doing is we're shooting a radar down into the ground, and it's reflecting off of things like changes in soil. And I had done some shovel testing here previously, but I was not happy with the results, and nobody's really ever done any work out here. So I wasn't really understanding the soil stratigraphy too much. And I thought that I had hit sterile subsoil, but I just wasn't sure. And I thought I had access to this equipment and I really wanted to train on it. So this was a good way to sort of bring this into dissertation things. So they let me do this in the front yard of the property owner's house. It's very, very kind of them. And I guess really in the grand scheme of things, it actually beats putting a whole bunch of shovels in the ground, right? We totally destroyed this guy's front lawn. It's okay, I put it back, like they were very gracious. You don't get to see the very end of the video, but it was actually Lana going. So that's how we collected this. We actually did 8 grids here in this little area right here, trying to understand what's going on. Like, what is this thing? What I was hitting in shovel testing was really not a whole lot of anything, just a bunch of burned stuff. A little bit of glass, but really no other material culture that lets me know that people are living and working here. Just like some weird blah. And the stratigraphy was not great at all. So the property owner told me that this place was planted in highland rice sometime in the 1950s. And you can see that, like there's like what would have been a plow zone that's about this deep. And then underneath that is just some muckety muck soil. And I'm like, what's going on here? So we did this. This is a time slice. When you do GPR, you have to post-process the data. It looks like a big old mess, doesn't it? It's okay, I'm gonna show you what's here. So what it's helping us do is understand change over time without putting a shovel in the ground, which is amazing, right? Notice this line right here. You can kind of see it at 30 centimeters. At 40 centimeters, it pops out pretty good. Then at 50, it's right there. So the GPR does not like metal. It will actually give a ring that shows up in the data as a void. And that's what that is. It's a void. It's actually a cast iron pipe, and it's connecting two canals. This is an old field. There's a canal system all the way around it. So I was like, cool. I got a void in the data, but it's still telling me stuff, right? Where things are not, which is sometimes really important. The other thing that it's telling us is we got something going on down here, right? There's a structure there. You can see it pretty plainly, right? It's kind of cool, y'all. There's a couple of suspect piles of stuff there. And I thought, oh, I have Miss Hetty's house. It's big enough. Those piles are probably something's like a rubble, right? Like a chimney foam, maybe a portico on this side. I was really jazzed. And then, ooh, look, maybe they built out something else over here. And there's some other stuff going on here too. There are things that I did not even, like there's so much happening in this yard. Like we didn't get to all of these things, and that's okay. Part of archaeology is a strategic sample, right? We're not gonna take everything. We have to leave something for somebody else that maybe can perfect these techniques. At some point, maybe we won't ever need to put a shovel in the ground, but we don't want to destroy the data, because as soon as we pull it out, we are destroying it. We're destroying that site. So we want to make sure we're leaving things. So we just take a sample. This is a great way to target a sample. In my case, I really just needed to know what was going on. So when I overlay, here she is right here. We'd already done some shovel testing through here. That's what those purple cones are. Those are shovel tests. And then the two red things right there are targeted test excavations meant to straddle that building, that wall structure, to see what was there and to get a sample of what's going on outside of it versus what's going on inside of it. So that's what I did. And what I figured out is I didn't go down far enough. Womp womp. But if we hadn't run the GPR, then we wouldn't have understood the broader landscape itself. So what's happening here? Can you see that mess right there? Looks all dark and kind of gross. It's actually the ghost mark of two building episodes that are coming in together like this. This is the bottom layer of where the brick would have been. That's the first course of brick. It's completely gone. They've taken it all out. And then over here, look at that mess. So this is that plow zone fill, right, where we're doing rice in the 1950s, and then a nice, beautiful landscape that I destroyed. It's okay, it grows back really fast, really quick. So this right here is actually a capping episode. So what they've done is they've dredged the canal system all the way around and then capped over what was here before, which was probably a barn structure. I don't have any evidence for any sort of material culture. So what's happening here? Probably a barn. And that would be the reason why we just get a little bit of glass, but no other ceramics or other sort of household goods that are letting us know that people are here. But it was a really interesting exercise to understand the landscape a little bit better. So if we hadn't had done the GPR, I would never have known exactly what to do with this. It would have taken a lot more labor. So this is the quick way to kind of understand the landscape in the broader scheme of things, and then really target what it is that we're trying to get to. And in this case, it was a barn. That's not Miss Hetty's house. Turns out Miss Hetty's house is actually underneath the modern Rochelle house. And we figured that out when the property owner raised the property to get it out of the flood zone. So there's actually 3 different building episodes under the Rochelle modern house. Still interesting, but that is not it. So I know that was a lot, right? The last couple of minutes, I'm going to tell you about Atchison's Creek, which is what we've been up to of late. I've been very fortunate to work with a number of wonderful people on this project. This is, we did Atchison's Creek this last summer as part of UNG's Archaeological Field School. We got the first ever South Carolina Department of Natural Resources permit to conduct work between the rivers archaeologically. And I'm very, very fortunate to work with my colleague, Dr. Jody Barnes, and Martha Zierden, who's newly retired and giving us her labor in the form of water screening and other kinds of things that she likes to do, and also artifact identification for us as well. So this is part of a pilot study to kind of understand, because nobody's done this work before, to try to understand what's going on between the rivers, and if we can actually see if there's anything left of the people that were living in this very remote place. So you can see, this is the North Santee, this is the South Santee. We're really out in the marsh here. Like it's very remote, and it's a little scary trying to get there. Like, this is a tidal water creek. When the tide is low, you may not get in or out, as we discovered. When the tide is high, it's inundated, and even if you wanted to put a shovel in the ground, you can't see your boot in the water to be able to do it, and then how are you going to get that dirt out of there, right? There were some challenges we had to overcome. My good friend and colleague Hayden Smith put together this chain of title for us. So originally this little area was part of a much larger chunk that was claimed by John Atchison in about 1732. It's about 1,300 acres between the rivers. He doesn't keep it that long. He sells the upriver half to Mr. Clapp, who creates Green Meadows Plantation. So if you're familiar with those plantations on the Santee, this is in the one of the ones that's in the Atlas book, the big one. Yeah. So by the 1780s, the other half of that gets purchased by Charles Ogilvie. And Joseph Manigault actually calls this Ogilvie's until about 1843. So he's the person, he purchases this property around 1812 or so, and he's the person that directs the labor camp to be built. This is a very small, discrete settlement. It's just kind of hanging out there. There's no other evidence of rice processing facility in the immediate vicinity. It's just a settlement. So for us, it was really a good test model to see if we're actually going to be able to get anything out of here or not, or if we've just lost it. We just didn't know. So enter case study. So this is what's left of the landscape today. There's 8 or 9 of these brick piles. That's literally all that you see on the ground surface. The marsh has pretty well taken it all. If you look at aerial imagery, these guys show up as these very uniform dots on the landscape. And then, I don't know if you can see that right there. That's a remnant dike system. So what they've done is diked off this entire area. These are canal systems that run through here, and then this is Atchison's Creek along here. That's probably been modified to create that nice 90-degree elbow there. So we think what's happened is enslaved labor, the people that are living and working here, have diked that off and then filled it in to get it dry, to get it up out of the swamp, so we're not so much into the effects of the tidal system. It's still there, that dike system is still there. It works to a certain degree, but we also have this little inlet, this little sprig here that makes things a little bit messy and dirty too. So I think back in the day, this probably would have been a little bit drier than it is now. So here's what we did. We did 38, 39 shovel tests in here over about a 2.5-week period. During that time, we learned how to work with the tide system. I learned that it really is a bad thing when you don't check your gas tank before you get in your boat and go. Because I ran out of gas. No, Martha and Eddie, they have it down. Like they even have the extra gas tank. I have one now too, like an extra 2 gas cans just in case. Yeah, my students still have nightmares over that. Oops. Yeah. It's okay, it's the Santee. There's always gonna be somebody floating, right? They'll come to your rescue. We have good people around here like that. So if y'all see me floating in the river, come get me, okay? Thanks. So if you're curious about what one of these things looks like, that is a shovel test, and here's the hole up close. It basically, it does fill in with water every so often, and you're not gonna be in here on high tide. So even at low tide, it's still marshy and yucky. You need buck boots to be in here. Surprisingly, very little mosquitoes. The breeze is really nice in here. So DNR protocol tells us that we're gonna make a shovel test, but we're gonna dig it by layers. So we dug every 25 centimeters and then we water screened each one of those buckets. And it's a good thing that we did that, because literally this is doing archaeology by braille. You're not gonna be able to see the stratigraphy, and you don't really understand what's happening in that hole unless you stick your hand down there and feel around, which is what I'm doing in that bottom picture. Here's some fun stuff. Here's us boating down the river. There's Martha and Eddie with some of our students and some of our equipment. My field school students in their field shirts. They were a little trepidatious to do this work, but literally by the end of it, the first day, they're like, oh, Dr. A, I'm not sticking my hand down that hole. No way. Like, it's all right, it's nothing gonna bite you. It's like, it's hermetically sealed. You know, there's some fish down there, you'd be fine. By the end of it, y'all, they were sticking their hands down there and they were going for it. And we found some really interesting things. There's Martha and Eddie doing some water screening with some of our students, and these two guys who, I think they hold, they have the record for 5 shovel tests in one day, which is pretty good for some aspiring archaeologists. That's not a bad effort There's the first piece of colonial ware that we found. That's African and African American made pottery. It's local potted wares. We weren't really sure what we were going to find. It turns out there is quite a bit here, and it's all hermetically sealed. The marsh has literally sealed it, which is really exciting for us. Martha told me she'd be so excited if she just found one piece of colonial ware and then she could be done. And we found a lot more than that. So this is pretty cool. This right here, that's part of the roof system for these cabins. Cypress shake shingles still intact, which we don't hardly ever see on either side of the river. Most of this stuff doesn't preserve because it's organic. In this context, it does because it's marsh. So when it sinks into the marsh overtakes it and it hermetically seals it. So if you're familiar with something like bog bodies, they've been in the news quite a bit. This is the same environment as that. Also the handle to digging implement or something like that over here, which I just don't see that on either side of the river. So this is evidence of people every day living and working here. That's a bead. It's a blue faceted bead, which we weren't expecting to find. And then foodways. Jody talked a lot about food at last month's Tuesdays With lecture. And now we have the remnants of what we see people eating every day here. So squash seeds and peach pits. These are squash seeds. I have a little bit of peanut shell in here too. So things that don't typically survive unless they're burned. And these are not burned. They're just here. Yeah. We also have some other wares too. So some European ceramics. I got really excited about the organics, and I didn't take as many pictures of the European ceramics, so I don't have any to show you, but think utilitarian white wares, table wares, some decorative things like this, and a little bit of pearlware too, which tell us collectively that this place is probably inhabited between about 1823 and into the 1880s, so well after emancipation. And we think the reason why is there's no reason to, there's nowhere to go after emancipation. People are living here, they've lived here for generations. If they're able to feed themselves, this might be a safe place to be for a while. Organic leather goods, that's a piece of belt, a couple of shoes. This is a right-left shoe, so we know people are here after the Civil War. That's a pig tooth, foodways. We don't know really, do they have pigs here? Is there cattle here? We do have some butchered bone. This is stuff that's still being processed. So we're still not understanding exactly what we have in terms of faunal remains, so animals. But it looks like maybe some chicken, a little bit of beef, but we're not really understanding if they're running it here. And they could be, right? If we've filled that in to get it dry enough to do it, then we could have livestock here. Still don't know how they're getting their water though, but one question at a time, right? Bricks, full intact brick from the brick pier system of these houses. I actually was taking a workshop with Jody over the summer. We went up to do a cataloging system training so that we could all be on the same page. And I cleaned this guy off, and you can see the finger marks of the person that made this, that little rake. So this tells us people are there, right? They're living here, they're working here, and it's an everyday thing. This is the remnants of everyday life, and a really cool snapshot that you don't often see. So Martha found this at the Charleston Museum. This is from Louis Manigault's Journals of Gallery Plantation, which is on the Savannah River, but it's still in the absence of any plantation sketches on the Santee. This is a really good comparative for us. And what you see here are and it sank into the marsh. And then our hydroelectric friends made sure that the silt covered it up. So it's still there, it's just sealed, which is really, really important. That gives us some really good context for understanding the archaeology and some people that we really don't know anything about. Oh, I'm giving it away. So why should we care? I'm telling you all these things. Yes, it's very, very cool archaeology, and this is legitimately what I've been doing for the last dozen years, hanging out over there, right? But we're kind of up against a little bit of a cliff here. This is why we should care. This is a map from NOAA of some climate change modeling. By the year 2100, this place is going to be underwater. This is actually a lie. These models are old. What we know now is probably in the next 20 years or so, we're not going to be able to see the delta like we do right now. It's going to be largely underwater. This is where Peachtree maybe becomes really important because it's probably going to be the driest of most of our plantations and the infrastructure that we still know about here in the Delta. Rochelle's going to be underwater. Definitely everything between the rivers is it's going to be inundated. So it's really important that we do this work now. And we have a strategy. I know you want to hear about it, captive audience. So this is the Santee Delta project. This is not my brainchild. I'm just fortunate enough to be tagging along. This is the brainchild of Dr. Richard Prochet, who many of you I'm sure you know. He's our botanist, South Carolina state botanist. Yes, he's also a really great historian. He's been working out here on the Santee River for, 40 or 50 years or so, boating around in his tiny little skiff called the Silver Fox. It's like this big. Yeah, that's the boat I ran out of gas twice this summer. Yeah. So he's been nice enough to let me borrow it and take students out there. He's always wanted to do this work and never quite had the time. And so he's collected a group of researchers and scholars, not just academics, but people that also have a vested interest in this place to help us document systematically and protect and preserve the cultural landscape of this place. Collectively, this is about 55,000 acres. I know this pink thing right here looks weird. That's the inland rice fields for Smith Hill. Those are really important because they are inland. So we want to document those as well. So our goal is a book. Dr. Prochet would like to see a book that is accessible to a general audience. We're hoping by 2027, hopefully. We'd like to do some oral histories with descendant community members who maybe their family lived and worked between these rivers to give us some context. We just don't know that much, and we need to know more before we lose it all. So this is what we're after. We're also doing some architecture. So to that end, we have a group of people from University of North Georgia, some retired archaeologists, some DNR archaeologists, and then also architectural historians from Clemson University and the College of Charleston, and the American College of the Building Arts, as well as a few other people that have agreed to come on and help us. It's a large collaborative project. If you want to know more, you can scan that QR code up there. That will take you to our website and you can learn all about what we're about. Man, I talked a lot. Does anybody have any questions? Yes? The Yonke plot is over here on the north side of the Santee, just on the mouth side of Annandale Plantation. Yep. Yes. What else? Yes. Oh, it's way far up the river. Yeah, way far up before it splits. Way far up before it splits. Yes. I've spent many Saturday nights looking at maps. Yeah, the 1873 U.S. Coast Survey really points out a lot of things. There are a lot of things that are labeled well. It's missing some things. It's not the aha. It's not X marks the spot, but it gives us a good place to start. And I've also studied the Plantation Atlas, Linder and Thacker, and a number of other secondary sources too. So, yeah, it's a complicated landscape. Yes, in the back. Yes. So I'm with the University of North Georgia, and I do archaeology field school. So my students come out, and if anybody else that would like to come out and volunteer, we do that too. We try to be as accessible as possible. Yes? In the next 20 years, probably 3 to 4. I might be lying though. Reed, is that?
4 inches, that's about right.
Yes, 3 to 4 inches in the next 20 years. Okay, so worse than that. Yes. On this one? Yes, it's this little guy right here. That's the North Santee River. Oh, okay. The community, just above Highway 17, right? Okay. So here's Highway 17, and I think it's back in here, correct? Somebody, Highway 17 is this little linear guy right here. Yeah, so I think back in here. Okay. Yes. Sure. So Dr. Perche would actually like to keep the money local. So the funding strategy right now is through private donation and private foundation money. We've done 5 fundraising events in the fall that got us collectively about $50,000 or so, which is nowhere near what we need for this 5-year strategy. I'm looking at probably around $1 million. It's expensive to do what we do. We also would like to pay interns and other folks that are helping us out with this project. I don't need to be paid. UNG does that for me. And also our scholars that are on contract with other universities are generally okay. But we like to have money to pay other people whose labor we're using, right? So that's part of that money. And then we also need equipment because y'all, boats are expensive. So it's coming, it's coming. We'll be applying for private foundation money. That's the strategy this next 6 months or so. There is, at that sweet little QR code, there is a place if you would like to donate to the cause. We would appreciate your help in this project too. It is a community project. We also try to be accessible, so if there's something that you would like to see as a community, or if there's a way that I can help you understand this place better, we're absolutely willing to do that. Yes? With the right calibration, it could. We're exploring some really cool techniques to use drone to conduct GPR survey. And I know it has been done in water context and also in ice. So I think with the right calibration, we could do it in a marsh context, but it would take some tweaking. I can't run it with the terrestrial setup that I have right now. The MAG survey would probably work, yeah. And you could actually use both of those data sets together to understand different kinds of things. Good question. Yes. Sure. Oh. That one? No. That one. Atchison's Creek is right there. Yeah. Yeah, it's underwater. It will be soon.
Travel down 17, the going south, you left.
Yes. Yeah.
Out in the marsh.
Yes. So this is Highway 17 right here. Atchison's is over here. Yeah. It's scary, I know. Yes.
One thing that I've always been curious about growing rice, how did the planters deal with the salinity of the water changing, with rainfall at times?
Yeah. So when the tide's going out, the fresh water is pushing in. It's actually floating on top of the salt. And then the tide pushes it back up. So if you're using your gates properly, your sluice gates, then you keep the salt water out of the fields and you flood it with fresh.
Do they have ways of testing?
Yes. Yeah, well, it was knowledge, I believe, that gets passed down from generation to generation back then, and then things start to change, right? Late 1900s, and that is less predictable. Yes.
What evidence do we have that the actual knowledge of how that when those sluices came from us happened?
There's actually been a lot of primary research that's been done on that. Judith Carney has done some really great work. She's a cultural geographer, and she's traced a lot of that traditional, not even just the knowledge base, The infrastructure is the same kind of infrastructure that we use here. There are a few things that are slightly different, so we think that there are some techniques that are coming from elsewhere, but the majority of it, based on what we can see of West African rice culture systems, looks almost identical. Yeah.
Is that the same thing as a trunk?
Trunk, sluice gate, similar, yes. Very similar.
Kendy, thank you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you very much. I'll just take it away.
Thank you, Kendy, for a wonderful presentation, outstanding, great information for all of us, and looking forward to future presentations and hearing how the project continues on.
Happy to do it.
Well, we got a commitment, thank you. Looking forward to that. I just want to mention a few things, if I may, as far as our announcements and activities for the Friends of the Library. I mentioned this is a monthly event. They'll be taking place again in March, April, and May. I would encourage you to come back. We've got some information on the back table there that'll give you what's coming up. Next month, in the month of March, Dr. Thomas Rainwater is going to be here. He is a professor at Clemson University's Baruch Institute of Coastal Ecology and Forest Science, as well as associated with the Thomas Yawkey Wildlife Center, and he is going to be speaking on biology of the American alligator in coastal South Carolina. And he's continuing work, Phil Wilkinson. I'm looking at Jim just to confirm. Many of you know Phil Wilkinson and the many years of work he did with the American alligator out at that location and continuing that. So I know you want to come back again the third Tuesday of March. And then I'm going to keep going because we have a sheet back there which lists all these events to pick that up, because our April speaker is here. Hannah Marley is here, who is up front. She's a park interpreter at the Hampton Plantation along the river, and Santee River. And she's going to be speaking on connections, how our South Carolina history intertwines with our lives today, what happened in the past and how it's affected us in ways we're not even aware of, and how important that is. And then in May, for our May Tuesdays with lecture, Ed Piotrowski is going to be coming to speak, chief meteorologist at WPD, as you all know, who did forecast the snow. What Memorial Day means to me. He grew up in a military family and is going to be speaking from that background, the experiences he had. We have a lot of activities happening, both within the Friends as well as, what the library is doing, and I do want to mention those. On the 28th, we're going to be co-sponsoring a tea that's here in celebration of Black History Month, a part of the culture of the Gullah community. We have an announcement about that. If you want to join us, that's going to be on February 28th at 3 o'clock, a community tea here in the auditorium. We also have our community yard sale. I have an announcement about that. This is what, if you don't want to have people treading all over your lawn and your driveway, we have them here annually, or actually twice annually, a community yard sale both in the spring and the fall. And so on March 15th in the parking lot just behind us here, great way to get rid of that stuff you've been wanting to get rid of. Future archaeological stuff, but at the same time, things that you can sell and get rid of at that time. We also have an annual event for us as Friends. We are, under our bylaws, required to have and want to have an annual meeting in which we report to all of our membership and the community. You don't need to be a member to join us here in the auditorium on Tuesday, February 25th, 1 week from today at 4:30 in the afternoon. So we'll be giving a report as to what has been our activities the past year, our plans for the coming year, but also we've discovered it's best not just to have a business meeting. What's the carrot and the stick? The carrot part, we're going to be having a special presentation on the Kaminsky House here in Georgetown. The Kaminsky House, its history in the case of the lost brooch. And Nick Robinson is going to be giving that presentation. It's a great story, wonderful part of what is the history of Georgetown. And Nick was just recently elected as the chair of the board at the Kaminsky House and a great speaker. If any of you have taken tours there and had Nick, he's a great tour guide of the Kaminsky House and knows that history well. I'm going through all of my things that I have here. I have one other that I want to mention, and that is The library is sponsoring with grant funding a wonderful series. It's going all the way from the month of February through May called Shared Traditions. And it is a series of lectures, musical events, et cetera, that are going to be here on various occasions, and we have the full dates. The next one is tomorrow. The Plantation Singers are going to be here singing and doing a presentation on Lowcountry spirituals. A complete record of this, or the schedule for this, is found on the back there, and there are several of them are posted. Dan, I'm getting it all right. Thank you, Dan. Dan's the one who's been organizing and putting together this terrific series, and as I say, it goes all the way from this month all the way through the month of May. There's a lot of information there, a lot of information we have shared with you. We hope you can join us for future Tuesdays with, as well as continue to support. Oh, I do want to say one more thing, and that is what we have right here. As we've talked about the library, some of you perhaps are in this auditorium for the first time. It just opened in the fall through what was a wonderful gift to the library, as well as county support for the total renovation of the interior library and the addition of this expanded auditorium. It was really wonderful. And the Friends have been active all the way through this, trying to support that renovation and expansion as much as we possibly can. There's a number of ways in which we've done landscaping, addition of murals, and so forth. But our focus is on this very, very special statue that we're working on to present to the library, hopefully before, and I was asked about this, most likely sometime in the fall. Perhaps some of you remember last year that we had here in Georgetown, down in Rainey Park, a statue as Harriet Tubman, thank you, of Harriet Tubman, which was really a wonderful celebration for us in Georgetown. There is a historic connection between Harriet Tubman and Georgetown, and that is her nephew, James Boley, was resident here in the Reconstruction era in a very significant way, serving as superintendent of schools, serving as editor of a newspaper, serving as a member of the board of the University of South Carolina, and played a very significant role in what was the growth and development through the Freedmen's Bureau of what was happening in economic development in Georgetown after the Civil War. He is the grandnephew of Harriet Tubman and was in the first group of individuals that she rescued on the Underground Railroad out of Maryland. And then after the war, ends up living here in Georgetown in a house that's been beautifully preserved that you can see with a historic monument in downtown historic district of Georgetown. What we wanted to do, the Friends of the Library, is in some way celebrate that. The one neat part of it is, even in the limited resources that she had, Harriet Tubman contributed to the school district of Georgetown by sending a check to help with what was a shortage of supplies after the Civil War. An amazing contribution, an amazing dedication that she had. So what we have is a statue that's going to commemorate the relationship between Harriet Tubman and James Boley, in which she is whispering in his ear as a small child an encouragement to go on, as indeed he did. She kept him with her in Philadelphia, paid for his education at the Friends School in Philadelphia. It's just a marvelous story, in a way in which he was able to prepare for his future life. And we call Whispers of My Ancestor, Whispers of Our Ancestor. And so, my ancestor. And so it's actually about the size it's going to be. It's going to be located just outside the children's library so that as children can come in, they can touch it. It's going to be a please touch statue. And I think it'll be a neat way. It's going to be about that height, so it's going to be at the height of the kids. You see on there, we were trying to raise about $40,000. That's for its statue itself. We are also raising an additional $20,000 for the placement and spacing of it and so forth. And so a total of $60,000. I was asked this morning, how are we doing? We are at $51,000 of private contributions. But we need that rest. And if you would like to contribute toward that, just make out a check, Friends of the Georgetown Library, or just Fogel, F-O-G-L, and we would really be glad of that. We just think it's going to be a neat way to celebrate our community, celebrate our heritage, celebrate our children, and a way in which we, in terms of our lives, can impact them as Harriet Tubman affected James Boley. I think that's the end of announcements. Again, Kendy, thank you.